This is a SandyBoy Productions podcast.
Welcome to the Urban Pharmacy Podcast, where we help women remove the overwhelm of living their most holistic life. This is the place to find evidence-based nutrition tactics, healthy lifestyle and wellness tips, abundance mindset, and easily implementable low-tox living strategies so you can rise up to your full potential and protect your family's health. I'm your host, Stacey, certified holistic nutritionist and better living advocate. Now, let's get empowered with some simple swaps that make a big impact for optimal wellness.
Today's episode is with Dr. T. Colin Campbell, and it's episode number 74 of the Urban Pharmacy Podcast. I am so glad you're here, my friend. Before I get going into the episode today, I want to be sure that you know some really amazing news. I have officially opened the doors to Holistic Mama Society. This is my new monthly membership program that gives you all of the ins and outs on how to live your most holistic life. We're talking plant-based nutrition, reducing toxins, optimizing your success environment, and so much more. What we do is we implement the holistic living pillars at the Urban Pharmacy, and that entails belief system, body nourishment, mind-body connection, success environment, and honoring earth. If you're ready to switch to a whole food, plant-based way of eating, if you're ready to be surrounded by other women who are rising up, and if you're ready to feel the best that you've ever felt, mind, body, spirit, the society is for you. Click the link in the show notes to learn more. And if you want, you can even book a one-on-one wellness chat with me to learn even more and see if Holistic Mama Society is right for you. All right, back to today's guest. It is a legend in the nutrition world. It is T. Colin Campbell, PhD, who has been dedicated to the science of human health for more than 60 years. His primary focus is on the association between disease and diet, and particularly cancer. Although largely known for the China study, one of the most comprehensive studies of health and nutrition ever conducted, and recognized by the New York Times as the Grand Prix of epidemiology, Dr. Campbell's profound impact also includes extensive involvement in education, public policy, and laboratory research. Dr. Campbell grew up on a dairy farm and was the first in his family to go to college, where he studied pre-veterinary medicine at Pennsylvania State University. After obtaining his bachelor's degree and while completing his first year at the University of Georgia Veterinary School, he received a telegram from a well-known professor at Cornell University offering a scholarship and research opportunity too good to turn down. And so he completed his education at Cornell University and MIT in nutrition, biochemistry, and toxicology. He then spent 10 years on the faculty of Virginia Tech's Department of Biochemistry and Nutrition before returning to Cornell in 1975, where he presently holds his endowed chair as the Jacob Gald Sherman Professor Emeritus of Nutritional Biochemistry in the Division of Nutritional Sciences. That is a mouthful to say. Dr. Campbell's research experience includes both laboratory experiments and large-scale human studies. He has received over 70 grant years of peer-reviewed research funding, mostly with the National Institute of Health, served on grant review panels of multiple funding agencies, actively participated in the development of national and international nutrition policy, and authored over 350 research papers, most published in peer-reviewed science journals. Throughout his career, he has confronted a great deal of confusion surrounding nutrition and its effects. It is precisely this confusion that he has focused on so much in the recent years. In order to synthesize the findings of his long and rewarding career and to give back to the public whose lives are threatened by rampant misinformation and special interest, Dr. Campbell co-wrote the China study, Startling Implications for Diet, Weight Loss, and Long-Term Health, which has sold more than 3 million copies worldwide and has been translated into 50 foreign languages. He is also the author of the New York Times bestseller, Whole, Low Carb Fraud, and the Future of Nutrition. An insider's look at the science, why we keep getting it wrong, and how to start getting it right. Several documentary films feature Dr. Campbell and his research, including Forks Over Knives, Eating You Alive, Food Matters, and Plant Pure Nation. He continues to share evidence-based information on health and nutrition whenever given the opportunity. He has delivered hundreds of lectures around the world, and he is the founder of the T. Colin Campbell Center of Nutrition Studies and the online plant-based nutrition certification program in partnership with eCornell. I stumbled on my words there, but it's because Dr. Campbell is just a legend, and there's so much to know about him, and you're going to learn so much more in this episode. I want you to know that I did take the eCornell plant-based nutrition certification program and thought it was really a great program to take. So if you are interested in expanding your knowledge and your education in whole food plant-based living, I highly suggest that you check it out. All right, without further ado, here is Dr. Campbell. Dr. T. Colin Campbell, welcome to the Urban Pharmacy Podcast.
Thank you. I'm really pleased to be here.
Super grateful to have you in my presence. As I was telling you before I hit record, you are basically like the pioneer in the plant-based world. And I am super grateful for all of the things that you have done. And we're going to learn more about that and about you today in this episode. So let's start off, Dr. Campbell, just learning about you. For the people who don't know about your work and what you have done in your life so far, can you just try to give us a shortened version of all of the stuff that you've done?
I'm glad you said so far.
So far, you've got so much time.
Yeah. Well, in any case, I started in my graduate work at Cornell University in the field of food and health in, believe it or not, 1956. That makes it 66 years ago. And I've worked on the same topic throughout. So that's quite a number of years. I also was from the farm, milking cows. When I was in graduate school, and the reason I say that because when I was in graduate school, my doctoral dissertation really was on research showing the importance of animal protein. And so that's my background, my professional. But in any case, that was pretty germane to the career I subsequently followed, because I learned that my impressions of animal protein were not exactly what they should have been. But in any case, ever since I've been deeply involved in research, obviously. I had a big research program, lots of students, doctoral students, postdoctoral students, honor students working in my lab. And so we had a lot of publications, a lot of work. And I also was involved in obviously teaching a lot, plus also being involved fairly intensively for at least 20, 30 years, intensely involved in national and international policy development. I was, I did the work in China, as you may know, the big study that lasted for quite a number of years. All of my work is, I think, is germane to what I did. All of my work was funded by American taxpayer dollars. I took no money from industry. I did that intentionally because I didn't want to be in a position of compromising myself. So we were generously funded all those years by either NIH, State Department, and government funding, essentially. So it gave me the freedom to say the things I wanted to say and talk about it. That turned out to be really important because I early on learned something about, as I said, animal protein was not exactly in accord with what I thought. Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. That's a very sensitive topic. because they started challenging, what not only what I thought, what everyone else thought. I started challenging the reverence we essentially have for animal-based protein. So certainly not deserved. And animal protein is one of the most consequential problems that we have in our society. We tend to believe here and abroad, around the world, that somehow animal protein is the centerpiece of human nutrition. And we've got to make sure we get enough animal protein, if you will. That's false. We can get all the protein we can need from plants, and in fact, it's better protein. The whole diet changes. So there it is in a nutshell.
Okay, so I just want to know a little bit about the China study. Why did you choose China to do the China study? And then what data, since the study has been released and your book has been released, in the literature, do you find the most compelling and persuasive for a plant-based eating pattern?
Well, the China study was the first project between the United States and China. That came about because one of the first delegations from China who came to the United States after Nixon's visit in 1972, this delegation of Chinese came to this country, and they had in that delegation their lead scientist. He came from a fairly famous family in China, but in any case, his name was Dr. Zhen Shushu, and he stayed behind and worked in my lab for nearly a year. And so we talked at that time about the possibility of doing this joint project in China. And in China, what I learned from him was that his government had documented how much cancer and other diseases existed in about 2,500 counties around the country. And what they showed was remarkable, that for the cancers, it was highly localized in certain geographic regions, being maybe 10, 100, even more than that, at times higher in the high areas than low areas. So what that suggests is that there's something about the local area, like diet and lifestyle, that may be involved. And so I jumped on the opportunity of working out something with him jointly. And then I also obtained a very famous epidemiologist from the University of Oxford who was involved in this. So I worked together to collect information on a total of 130 villages around the country. And of course, the New York Times eventually called it the Grand Prix of epidemiology. It was the most comprehensive, in-depth studies ever, I guess, in epidemiology. And so we caught all kinds of information, nutritional, we took blood samples and urine samples and food samples, et cetera, et cetera. And so we had a chance to compare the relationship of diet with disease, especially cancer and other diseases. That was important to me because I was getting work in the laboratory that consuming animal-based protein diets really is associated with a lot of risk for cancers, heart disease, diabetes, and that sort of thing. And I wanted to see, and those were experimental animal studies at the time, partly derived from human experience in the Philippines I'd worked in before. But in any case, I wanted to see if what we were seeing in the laboratory, which was so spectacular, might also be equivalent to what we might see in humans. China was the perfect place because there, as I say, the diseases were localized geographically. And number one, and number two, the people that were in our survey, they were born and lived in the counties for most of their lives. 94% of the people continued to live in the place where they're born. That's really important research-wise because it means that they're producing locally produced food, basically. They're not moving, so it's not complicated by, switching from here to there and different foods and so forth. So it was ideal in that sense. And so what I basically learned, don't want to get too deep into this, but basically that not just for cancer, but also for heart disease and others too, that in China, as soon as people started putting animal foods in their diet, there was a small amount. I mean, keep in mind, this is rural China. So in rural China, most of the people are consuming mostly just plants, locally produced food. And as soon as some people started putting animal food in their diet, that's when the risk of cancer started to go up. That's when the risk of heart disease went up. And for example, higher cholesterol levels and things like that. That was quite remarkable. And so that broadened the scope of my interest from the laboratory. It wasn't just about cancer. This diet thing wasn't just about cancer. It was also about, a variety of so-called chronic degenerative diseases that are common here in the West and other countries like us. Colon cancer, all the different kind of cancers and heart disease and so forth. So that really expanded my vision. And we also had from the laboratory too, evidence that these diseases could be reversed by simply putting them on the right kind of diet. And that was a big deal. And that really became real in many ways a few years later when I met my friend, Dr. Calder Esselstyn, another friend, Dr. Ornish, Dr. McDougall. They, all physicians, had kind of gotten into this thing and discovering that they could reverse heart disease by switching people to this. So everything just sort of kind of came together. Laboratory, some very exciting things there. We could turn cancer on and off by nutritional means. And then the human studies in China, and then the national policy development, because I was also seeing there, what goes on at the national level and international level. And it's something I saw, and I'm writing another book on that right now. It really has to do with the way the system, the healthcare system, wrapped in politics, wrapped in history, wrapped in economics, if you will, how our healthcare system controls what we, the citizens, get to know. That's a really serious problem. And that's one of the reasons that the whole food plant-based diet, it turned out, it's pretty spectacular what it can do. My book, for example, The China Study, which I co-authored incident with my son, who's now a physician, Tom, he's continuing some of his work. But in any case, what turned out is that book, I didn't know what it was going to be successful or not, but it turned out it was very successful, and it's been translated into 50 foreign languages by now. And so it's kind of really gotten around the world. And then I followed on with some additional books after that. But sorry for this long-winded answer, but it's all connected, and it's hard to say one thing without recognizing some other things with it. So
100%. So let's talk about that holistic approach. I teach about holistic with an H, and I think that has a lot of different meanings to a lot of different people. But Wholeism is an approach that you teach when it comes to nutrition. Can you explain what you mean when you talk about whole? I mean, you have a book about it, and your nutritional approach with Wholeism.
Well, first off, I should say I gradually became aware, starting, in 1980, to be honest about it, became aware that nutrition doesn't work through individual nutrients that we consume. In other words, we can look at diets as high in this or that or something else, but when we take that nutrient out and put it in a pill, for example, it doesn't necessarily work the same way. Mm-hmm. It's unpredictable. So that led me to the idea of wholeness, whole foods. That was back in the early 1980s. So it was the wholeness of the idea that, I forget what your original question was.
Can you explain your Wholeism approach to nutrition?
Oh, yeah. So anyhow, it was that was the first observation, that nutrients work best when they're in the presence of other nutrients in the whole food. That's when you get the really big bang for the buck. Nutrition does not come from nutrient supplements, for example, which are one nutrient at a time. They're unpredictable. So it's really the wholeness of foods. Now, and one of the things that really, that's, I think of all the things I came across, that was probably the most exciting, because we tend to think in traditional medicine circles and research, we tend to think if we see a relationship between a cause and then the outcome, like, effect of a certain nutrient, it's associated with, let's say, a colon cancer or prostate cancer, heart disease, something like that. We tend to focus on one thing. That's risky. That's very risky, as I said. And so when we, in the laboratory animal study, we could turn cancer on by increasing animal protein. We could turn it off over the same experiment, we could turn it off by just decreasing animal protein. Very dramatic, and it happened very fast. So at that point, I was actually in two disciplines at the time. I was in pharmacology. So I was very familiar with the drug approach to the way of handling disease. So with that concept in mind, we tend to want to know what's the mechanism. This protein turns it on. Well, how does that work? Is it this enzyme, that enzyme, something else is going on? So we started looking for the mechanism, because if we could find the mechanism, then it might lend itself to development, let's say, of some kind of drug that we could take to block that problem. I mean, that's what happened with statins. Statins, are being given to people with a risk for heart disease, maybe have heart disease, and it really doesn't work quite that way. They'll tell you otherwise, but it's really not true. But I was in that camp looking for the possibility of drugs. So we looked for a mechanism. Every time we looked for a mechanism, essentially we found one. By a mechanism, I'm talking about an enzyme mechanism, or the transport of a nutrient into the cell, or the formation of mutations and so forth. And some of these mechanisms, when you increase protein, animal protein, by the way, not plant, increase animal protein, then the entry of the carcinogen into the cell would be increased. The enzyme that's responsible for metabolizing the carcinogen once it gets to the cell, that is increased too in two different ways. So we increased mutation. We did on and on and on. And finally, I came to realize, and each one of those studies was usually like 3 or 4 years, and usually involved a graduate student doing a doctoral dissertation. Not all, but it takes quite a little while, to develop the methodology and so forth. So what I saw was, holy smoly, the animal protein, when it's increased, all the mechanisms, any mechanism that's being changed, is always changing. Some come up, some go down, but they all change in a direction to cause one result: more cancer, more cholesterol, in the blood, so forth. To me, and that was the antithesis of Western medicine, because what that says is that one nutrient, just take one nutrient, in this case protein, one nutrient can cause this sort of plethora or group of mechanisms all changing together. That is radically different from the Western model of medicine, which I was in. And so not only did we learn all these mechanisms all working together, no exceptions, it was absolutely convincing that the animal protein increases cancer, period. There's no one can ever dispute that to the contrary. And the same with heart disease, I should say, and others. But not only is it true for animal protein, it turned out it's working for other nutrients too. Just imagine, when we eat the whole food, got all these nutrients in it, each of them operating by a whole complex array of mechanisms to create an array of responses, from cancer to heart disease to diabetes, whatever. That's the concept of holism. And I of course, wrote the book on that. That came out in 2013. Actually, that book too is really catching on, especially in the Eastern countries.
Good.
I lecture there as well. But in those countries, because indigenous cultures tended to favor that kind of program. Mm-hmm. And I know with your interest, I think by your name, the Urban Pharmacy.
Yes.
Apparently, as I understand, it's kind of leaning toward the idea that herbal medicines may be important.
Absolutely. Plants heal. Yeah.
Yes, and they're all plants. And by the way, when I was in China, we worked there for 25 years off and on. I got to know the director of the collection, the library, if you will, the collection of ancient herbs that the Chinese had. They had about 2,400 different kinds of herbs, bits of it in their so-called library. They sent me samples of all those herbs. Mm-hmm. And so I actually, at that time, I was involved with an organization here in Ithaca that was testing herbal supplements on this and that and some other things. And so, but the herbal approach is different from the drug approach. The drug is on one thing at a time, as you know. The herbal things, everything working together. And of course, I really learned that in spades from my Chinese colleagues.
Mm-hmm.
Ancient is, 2,000-3,000 years old and so forth. And so I actually went to the FDA at that time. And I had been involved with the FDA in early years. So I knew the folks and knew my way around. I wanted to go down to the FDA and say, hey, this herbal business is for real. I've seen it in China. I know it exists, but we somehow don't recognize it here in the West. I said, how can we work with this? So they had people coming from 11 senior people from different FDA laboratories around the country. So we had a chat, a conversation. And I came away from it realizing something I thought I knew in the beginning, but nonetheless, it was proof. The FDA, it does not accommodate this kind of thinking.
Mm-hmm.
And they don't have any regulations really for herbs, except maybe some negative comments to make. And that's so herbal substances don't enjoy the reputation.
Right.
That drugs might, as you know. And so, yet on the other hand, that concept of using herbs, which, as you know, is whole food, really, kind of dried and combined and so forth and so on, that does have effect. It does have effect, and it's an effect, we call it a medicinal effect.
Mm-hmm.
And that's sort of equivalent to, let's say, eating whole foods. And of course, all those herbs, almost all those herbs are plant-based.
Yes.
And not exactly all, because in China they use snake poison, snake toxins. They use horns, sometimes of animals. So it's not 100%, but it's close to it.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
This dichotomy. Here's the FDA on the one hand looking out for Western medicine.
Yeah.
And here's herbal medicine from Asia and India and Africa.
Yes.
Doing something different.
Yeah, it's incredible. I got my certification in herbalism this year. I have so much to learn. And that's actually originally why we bought our farm. We bought a farm about 7 years ago. And the initial reason was to grow herbs. We're currently just selling at the farmer's market, all of the different plants, all the different things that you would find at the farmer's market. But once we live there, we will be getting deeper into herbs. And there's just, I learned a lot about the pharmaceutical industry when I went through my certification. So it's quite profound what we're doing here in America and how under a rock we live, so to speak.
Hey friend, before we get too far into this episode, I want to be sure you know about how the environment plays a role on your overall health. For over a decade, I've been learning so much about the lack of health regulation in the personal care and food industries, and that's actually one of the reasons why I started this show. You deserve to know how to protect you and your family from unwanted body burden, and I share further information about how to make better choices and vote with your dollar in our private Facebook community called The Urban Pharmacy. On that note, I want to let you know about one of the easiest ways that we've switched to safer, and that's through my favorite clean beauty brand called Beauty Counter. Your skin is your largest organ, and what you put on it every day matters a lot. And with a low carbon footprint, cruelty-free formulations, and high-performing results, I haven't found a better beauty brand than Beauty Counter in over 5 years of working with this mission-driven brand. To learn more and shop clean, head to mybetterbeauty.com.
Okay, so Dr. Campbell, when we're talking about a whole food plant-based lifestyle and the health benefits of it, do you think it's because of one of these three reasons or all of them combined? Is it because of a lack of food processing? Is it because the intrinsic benefits of plants like phytonutrients and fiber, kind of, like the holistic approach, the Wholeism approach? Or do we think it's the absence of animal protein? Or do we think it's a combination of those three?
It's all three. There's some contribution from all three. The processing, I don't, we have to attend to that question because processing processing is a big word and it covers a lot of stuff. I mean, I would say that we could call processing just cooking food.
Right.
Or, cutting it up, dicing it up.
Right.
I don't give too much importance to that, quite frankly, except in those situations where, let's say, you're loading up the food with salt and sugar and fat or whatever like that. That's a different sort of question, I think. But in any case, that's one thing. As far as the wholeness of food, I think we sort of covered that in a sense. It's the wholeness of plant foods, not animal foods. To give the rise to this. And what was the third thing? Sorry.
Well, it's the lack of processing, the intrinsic benefits, like the holistic, the phytonutrients, the fiber, all that, and then the absence of animal protein. And do you think that out of those three, because you said it is all three, and really it is truly, but is there one of them that holds priority in terms of health?
Yeah, I'm glad you are working in the area because our combined interests can really show something, I think. Namely, I would say put protein at the top. Mm-hmm. It's our reverence for protein that's as old as the Bible, to be honest about it. It's very, very old. And we've had this unusual reverence for consuming animal food, basically. I mean, to be honest, I'm not a biblical scholar or anything for that matter, but I know, just looking at some of the literature on this question, there are statements in the Bible, for example, the Old Testament, advising us to eat plants. There's others advising us to eat animals, believe it or not. Mm-hmm. So there's another statement. I can't quote you the verse and chapter, whatever it is. But it turns out that there's a reminder in the Bible that we shouldn't be arguing with people who decide to eat animals. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Let's do it. I thought it was really peculiar. So anyhow, I would put protein at the top because protein was discovered as a chemical in 1839, a long time ago. And it was given the name protein from the Greek word proteos, P-R-O-T-E-I-O-S, which means first or primary importance. So that chemical, when it was first discovered, was baptized with this auspicious name, protein from proteos, means of prime importance, the stuff of civilization and so forth and so on. It took on a life of its own, a super life. It's just a name. The nutrient, being the first it was at the time, then became the centerpiece for the Western diet. We're going to consume animals to get that good protein. Mm-hmm. Then around 1920s or so, there was some research done at the University of Illinois, allegedly showing that all the animal proteins are more valuable than plant proteins. That gave rise to a concept called biological value. Mm-hmm. Biological value also gave rise to the very popular concept, high quality. So animal protein became high quality. Plant protein, there's plant protein, but it's low quality. Well, that kind of stuck around subconsciously or consciously, whatever, for all the years since. Animal protein is where you get the real good protein from, so to speak. That original research had focused on the idea that those proteins for which there is higher body retention when they consume it under test conditions, the proteins for which there is a higher level of retention in the body, that's considered quote unquote high quality. And the reason they agreed it was high quality because it stimulated body growth rate faster. Mm-hmm. That's good for farming, if you will, growing pigs faster and all that sort of stuff, maybe more eggs and chickens, etc. And so that high quality idea then translate into human health. Oh, well, if it works there, we humans also like to grow fast and they like to do that. Well, the point is, and so all the animal proteins are high quality. They're a little bit different, if you compare them, but they're basically high quality. All the plant proteins, low quality. Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the things about high quality protein, and I'm saying something now that my colleagues will not say. It's a big point of contention. the higher the proportion of the protein that's retained in the body, the higher biological value, high quality. The higher percent retained, you know what that does? It increases blood cholesterol levels. It does a whole lot of those mechanisms I talked about a moment ago. So therefore, it increases the rate of cancer, sort of across the board. It increases heart disease, cardiovascular disease in general. It increases diabetes somewhat indirectly. So you get all this stuff going on with higher retention. So therefore, the higher so-called quality for animal proteins, something's wrong there. That's just not about growing the fastest rate of growth. That's all these other things that's going on. So that's a misnomer. And because of these other things, and plants provide all the protein we need.
Yes.
So animal protein, the reverence for animal protein has actually dictated, either directly or indirectly, our preference for food through the years. If there's one thing that kind of changes the diet more than anything else, it is this fascination with animal protein. I saw that in China with my colleagues there and elsewhere in other developing countries, that they don't consume much animal food in all those places, but they couldn't wait to get their hands on it because, as I was told by my Chinese colleagues, for example, you're a wealthy country, you got rich, you got affluent, et cetera, because you consumed animal protein. I said, oh, really? In other words, they associate animal protein, the possibilities of consuming animal protein with wealth.
Right. Diseases of affluence. I learned about that. Yep.
From you. So it's the life of protein has been such that we just jump to it. You know, we seem like we have to have it. And the recommendation for protein is higher than it should be. So this has just been a human, I don't know, intrinsic human belief system. And so my research showed over the years that's false. That's totally false. And so the whole question concerning why did we get here? Well, I'm arguing the case on the basis of history, very old history, as well as on the basis of the fact that our lust for animal protein has led to a very robust livestock industry, together with the dairy industry, the egg and so forth. I mean, that's a common sort of feeling that animals are here put on the earth for us to eat, period. End of story. We kind of dressed it up with scientific evidence that, yes, that's true. We have to have animal food. And I'm saying, so to answer your question, I think animal protein thing is the single most important.
Okay.
Secondly, I don't want to necessarily rate them this way, but the idea of whole. Eating whole foods instead of trying to take some stuff out of it, like we already just talked about. That's obvious, the second element. And then thirdly, the processing, which as I say, is kind of a mixed bag, because I'm not sure what we do with processing. The way I interpret that is the kind of processing food that I'm troubled by is the kind of food where, let's say you can take plant parts, you can take the fiber, you can take the sugar, you take this and that, you mix it together and put it in a recipe. You know, you get cakes and muffins and this and that. And then you dress it up with salt, sugar, and fat.
Yeah.
Because that's what people like. And then they can become addicted to it. Once they're addicted to it, they become customers.
Yeah.
Now the customers makes money. So the processing part is important, yes. But as far as the biology is concerned, or the medicine is concerned, I think it's the protein I'd put first, and then secondly, probably wholeism, and then thirdly, the processed stuff.
Got it. Okay. Thank you. Okay. So for those people, and I really looking forward to what you're going to say here. For people who are reluctant to give up animal protein, what is the quote least bad approach to occasionally including meat or chicken or fish or eggs? I mean, we've got cholesterol in eggs. We've got TMAO in red meat. We've got, histamines in fish. I mean, and I know that based on your studies, like it doesn't really matter via the protein. Like it is animal protein is animal protein. But like, is there one that's a little less than the other? And if they wanted to incorporate it, what would you say would be the maximum per week?
Well, let me give a little background on that comment, incidentally. That's a good question, by the way. Our reverence for consuming animal protein is such that we eat animals, okay? That goes from fish to eggs to dairy to meat and all that stuff. But what we should also remember, as we increase the proportion of the diet in the form of animal foods, whatever they may be, as we increase that proportion, the proportion of plant foods goes down. So when we see relationship, for example, between the amount of animal protein consumed in different countries, which is really quite an impressive piece of data, but when we see that, that's reflecting simultaneously reflecting an increased animal food consumption and decreased plant food consumption. That works that way. And plant foods, of course, have a lot of the good stuff, as you know, antioxidants and complex carbohydrates and so forth and so on, minerals, etc., vitamins. And so I think, yes, now to go offline, I got to thinking about what I was talking about before, but yes. What's your question again?
Oh, like if they were going to choose a protein.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
I'm going to say, I says, the one that most likely that people fall back on is fish.
Mm-hmm.
That's the least likely. Well, it turns out fish protein also increases the risk of these diseases when it's tested that way, just like the other animal proteins. So fish protein is not that different from other animal proteins. So that's a strike against fish, okay? On the other hand, there was some evidence here, 30 years ago or so, that fish had the so-called omega-3 fats, which are anti-inflammatory. And so that gave some emphasis to consumption of fish, maybe they're not as bad. And actually, it's one of the last foods we gave up, and I was persuaded to some extent by that. And maybe also by cheese. So that you said the least problematic. I'm going to say fish and maybe cheese. The reason I'm saying cheese, or maybe I should say fermented dairy.
Right, fermented.
And like yogurt and so forth. The fish, let's come back to fish for a second. Fish have this omega-3s in them, as opposed to omega-6 fats, which sounds good. But yet the protein is the same.
Right.
The other thing about fish too, it doesn't have the antioxidants that or the fiber. So it turns out fish is really not that different from the rest of animal foods. So I don't know whether there is a least offensive on that score. On the other hand, on the dairy side, I have real difficulties with the dairy, even though I grew up milking cows. But in any case, the protein of cow's milk is not good, period. But when we ferment it, form of yogurt and stuff like that. And there's some people in the world who are consuming yogurt and getting some pretty good results.
Yeah. I
think that's the least offensive.
That's what I really wish I could remember the doctor's name, but he's with Zoe, the gut microbiome test, and Dr. Will Bolsowitz, he's like on the science advisory board with Zoe. And that's something that I learned. Like if somebody is going to choose to have anything that's coming from an animal, probably the only thing that would be beneficial, although there is saturated fat, would be, that fermented dairy. And that's it. So there's that. We'll close that question. Okay. So what are your thoughts? Yeah.
Make one comment. You just said saturated fat. Saturated fat, by the way, from a chemical physiological point of view, is not so bad, believe it or not.
Okay.
It's not very reactive. Saturated fat took a whipping just because when people came up with the idea of saturated fat, that was Ansel Keys and some others back in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, because saturated fat was related to heart disease. So they started blaming the increased heart disease on saturated fat because it's mostly in animal foods, right? But it turns out the saturated fat in animal foods is only a surrogate for the real culprit. The real culprit was protein. Because if you take the saturated fat out, it's not that all that chemically reactive. It's almost like neutral. Yeah, it can build up and stuff in there. But in any case, the unsaturated fats of plants They're good in plants. They're great. Because why use them appropriately with all the other nutrients? If you take it out, on the other hand, put it in a bottle, you get corn oil and stuff like that. That's a different story.
Right.
Because most of that oil is omega-6, the pro-inflammatory.
Right.
So I back off from the saturated fat condemnation, I guess, a little bit on that.
Interesting. Okay. There's a big emphasis on that with my Food for Life classes. So, okay, cool. Thank you for letting me know. Safety of processed vegan foods such as Impossible Burgers. I mean, we're talking about high inflammation there. What do you think about Impossible Burgers?
Good question. I've gotten to know those folks recently. I had a question too, and I don't want to talk about my conversation with them really, because it's proprietary to some extent. But I think their idea, like some of the other companies too, of going to that kind of synthetic food, basically plant-based, in principle, good idea, I think, because we can get all the protein we need, if you will, from plants instead of animals. And I'm the one who came up with the word plant-based, by the way, in the late 70s. But in any case, so they're kind of a takeoff on that whole idea, plant-based. But they're going with the plant protein thing because it's better. That's what sounds good. Some of these companies, without getting into the names and stuff like that.
Yeah, we won't. Not just as necessarily Impossible Burgers, but these high oil processed burgers.
Yeah, they got into it because the word plant-based is becoming popular.
Right.
And so that there was a looming market there, emerging market. So they got into that for that reason. But when they started making the foods, there's some problems they haven't adopted. They're not appropriate. First off, this is a difficult one to handle. They might want to use soy protein a lot instead of, let's say, animal protein, and they'll mix and match and try to make it right. The soy protein is unfortunately GMO. 90% of that is GMO. That's a problem for, at least mentally, for a lot of people. Mm-hmm. And maybe problematically in health, I don't know. But in any case, that's one angle they took. Another angle that some of these companies took too was to let's grow the animal-like protein in a test tube or in a big vat. We'll use the DNA template for making, let's say, muscle or making this or that or something else. We'll put it in this vat and we'll let it actually synthesize from that DNA template or RNA template the kind of protein that sort of matches the composition of animal protein in the real animal. Mm-hmm. Say, oh, here okay. Now we can just grow all this animal protein in a vat. That's a synthetic kind of idea. I challenge that because, quite frankly, the protein being made is exactly the same amino acid composition as the real animal protein because they're using the same template. And that composition, that amino acid composition is going to create, I'm sure, we haven't really tested yet, is going to create the same problems, as it does from the real animals. So on one group, they have to wrestle with the GMO question a little bit. The others are wrestling with the idea of using cell-based, cell-synthesized protein. Then there's a third problem, and you referred to that a moment ago, is the fact that they kind of dump in oil and stuff like that to, try to make it tasty, whatever they're doing to it. So we end up with a composite kind of food product that's iffy, kind of iffy. And so I'm almost under the notion that my approach is to why do we ever get caught up in eating one of the animal protein or any other proteins like it? Mm-hmm. We don't even do that. Mm-hmm. Just eat all the plant protein and our problems will be solved. Mother Nature will take care of that for us.
Right.
So anyhow.
Okay, so given that the plant-based movement is gaining traction, what do you think are some of the next steps to help move the needle forward with Americans' health? I mean, we know Dr. Clapper is doing his moving medicine forward and trying to, get medical students to learn about nutrition. But have you witnessed any shift in the treatment that physicians are using with plant-based eating?
Well, I think it's fair to say there's an increasing number of physicians, not still a very small number, but there's an increase in the number of physicians who are taking this quite seriously and trying to adopt in their practices use of this kind of food. And we have some on our board in our Center for Nutrition Studies, for example. My own son has been running a thing at the University of Rochester, and people with diabetes or women with advanced cancer. So some of that kind of research is going to be necessary to actually get the data to help people become convinced. It's a really slow process because the people going into medicine, they went into medicine. Two polls have shown this, one back in 1956 and 1971, showed the same thing. 5 out of 6 medical students went to medical school because of income producing potential as the first priority. Mm-hmm. So, if they all of a sudden go over to the plant-based idea, it creates a problem because it's hard to get compensation. They can't be rewarded for what they're doing. And that's a big issue at the policy level, because the policy level, what we need to do is to ensure that doctors who choose to adopt this plant-based diet idea in reversing disease, let's say, which is dramatic, or use it in other good ways, they need to be compensated for their services, for crying out loud. Mm-hmm. And right now, it's very difficult. It's very difficult. So until we solve that problem, they're not going to do very much shifting because they have to earn an income just like everybody else. So that's an issue. Number one. Number two, in the medical schools, there's not a medical school in the country that teaches nutrition, not the kind I talk about. Mm-hmm. Some of them may give a few lectures, but it's the old traditional Krebs cycle, biochemical kinds of stuff that, it's not that significant for their practices. So we need to teach nutrition honestly to medical schools. That's mm-hmm. number two. Number three, we need to, at the National Institutes of Health, which is the primary research funding agency, most of my money came from NIH, and I'm quite familiar with them and I understand what they're doing. There's 27 institutes at NIH, one for heart disease, one for cancer, one for that, stuff like that. There's not one called Institute of Nutrition. Mm. So we have erased the word nutrition essentially from our professional language. Mm-hmm. The public uses that word a lot, and industry uses the word nutrition this, nutrition that, and everything else. But when most people are speaking about nutrition, they're referring to the effect of individual nutrients. Mm-hmm. Or as they talk about food, this food is good because it's got this nutrient in it, or it's high, or whatever. That's problematic for me. So, but we need to figure out ways, and this is a real structural infrastructure problem. We need to figure out ways for healthcare practitioners to work with their patients, with a nutritional approach. And they need to understand that initial approach, and they need, as I say, they need to be compensated. They need to be supported in other sorts of ways. And most importantly, we need to have at the policy level, advisories like the dietary guidelines or like nutrient recommendations or this or that. We need at that level, that's highly political, we need to actually convey this message to the population at large. Mm-hmm. They're doing everything they can right now to block the message, I will tell you. And that's where I have gotten a lot of pushback over the years. I mean, it's really serious. Yeah. Because the present system is such to focus on one thing at a time. That's reductionist medicine, rather than the holism we talked about. And you mentioned that before, by the way. I came up with the word W because when I was writing a book, Whole, I liked the concept of wholeness. And I thought I was seeing a dictionary it's spelled maybe the old dictionary like Oxford or something like that. I see a W there. It wasn't there. I put the W in front of that word. But I didn't want to get into the H word, the holistic word, because it's a good word. It's fair enough. But the problem is it tends to be interpreted, as a more of a, let's say, almost a religious concept.
Okay. Yeah.
To some extent. And so I didn't want to go quite down that road. So I put the W in front of it so that I could speak about the science. Things.
I love it. I love it. Okay. So we're going to act like Brian is asking you questions on the Real Truth About Health conference. We're going to do rapid fire questions. Okay.
Okay. Good enough.
You know how he makes you like, he gives you guys like 1 minute. He's like, you have 30 seconds to answer the question. That's what we're going to pretend like we are. Okay. So here we go. Older adults, do they need to intentionally increase their protein intake?
No. There is some evidence from some folks, maybe a little bit. I can't be 100% certain that they're there, but my evidence suggests the answer is no.
Okay. Are vegan protein supplements safe, and do they increase your risk of cancer?
No.
Okay.
Vegan protein supplements, I mean, yeah, no, the answer is no.
Okay. What are your thoughts on intermittent fasting and related topics? For longevity or any fasting benefits, like to time restricted eating?
Well, there's quite a lot of discussion on that recently, intermittent fasting. There's two kinds of fasting. Intermittent fasting, ranging your meals, do the day, fast part of the day, whatever. We know that. I don't, there's some research showing that doesn't make a big difference. But I am familiar with a different kind of fasting. Sorry if it's a long question, but there's water-only fasting that goes on for maybe weeks. I've done that a couple of times myself, and I did it because I was the one who isolated dioxin, that terrible compound, and my body was loaded with that, and I was suffering some of the consequences. The only way I could apparently get rid of it was doing water-only fasting. I became quite a fan.
Yeah.
Water-only fasting.
Did you go to True North Health Center to do that?
Yes, absolutely. And Alan Goldhammer was a good friend of mine. I went the first time way back in the early 1990s.
I'm going to meet him this summer, and I am so excited.
Yeah, he has got an institution right now. It's really hard. He's got like 65 beds, I think, in this new place he is.
Oh, wow.
All they're booked up 6 months out.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great program, and I like Alan a lot. He's a very good friend, and I call that the future of medicine.
Oh, for sure. Amazing. Okay. What supplements should plant-based individuals choose?
None.
Okay.
That includes B12, by the way.
Okay, because supplements are not a panacea for good health. I learned that in your program as well.
Right.
Okay. Why do some doctors recommend the ketogenic diet? Like, what are your thoughts on this?
The keto diet came from the Atkins diet.
Yeah.
The carb, back in the 1970s. And Dr. Atkins, he didn't like the kind of stuff that I was talking about, and Senator George McGovern and some others. I'm convinced it was a reaction on his part against what we were talking about, a plant-based kind of a diet. He wanted to go back, and the best way he could think about, hey, he says, all the problems you guys have that you're talking about is due to the carbohydrates. Mm-hmm. So let's go to a low carbohydrate thing, which means high protein, high fat, back to the original. It's kind of clever, but he was right in one sense. We were overloading with refined carbohydrates, fair enough. But he was using a word that really reflected on our consumption of plants, which is all the carbohydrates come from plants. So it was a backhanded way to take a stab at the plant-based community. Mm. And so then that evolved into the ketosis thing. Sure enough, when people go on keto diets, they lose some weight. That's impressive. People who got weight, they get sold on it. Cholesterol in the blood goes down a little bit, but it's a short-term effect. If they stay on it too much longer, and they usually don't, they're going to end up with the same heart disease and everything else. That's what Atkins himself died of, heart disease.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. Any thoughts on anti-aging pharmaceuticals like metformin and rapamycin?
I don't know them in detail, and I guess I would not comment because I think the best anti-aging approach is eating the right food.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Other than whole food plant eating, what other lifestyle measures do you suggest people incorporate for good
Well,
health?
getting plenty of sunshine, one thing.
Okay.
When that's possible. Sometimes that's not possible,
Right.
but I think sunshine is an element that is very important. Obviously, getting sleep, good regular sleep, getting water, just staying healthy on water, and most importantly, probably staying physically active.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think exercise of some sort or another, something that's pleasant, exciting, whatever, getting outdoors, that all adds up.
Yeah.
That adds up. I think physically it makes a difference, to say nothing of the mental effect it has on us,
Mm-hmm.
that sort of get outdoors.
Yes. Okay. So what advice do you have for those who discovered what advice do you have for those people who have discovered this way of living, this plant-based lifestyle, and they want to make an impact? Like, what do you suggest that people do? I know that that's kind of a broad question, but.
Yeah, that's okay. I a little bit of bias here on this one, but I don't get paid for this, so I have to point that out. CNS now, and you're familiar with that. We have a new program. My daughter is now the president. She had a doctorate in education and curriculum development, and she was in the Peace Corps, so she knows that whole domain. She has come on board now and introduced the concept of broadening the scope of CNS, in doing exactly that. Focusing on communities around the world. So CNS is now giving out microgrants. I think they've given out microgrants, really small amounts of any group in the world who is sort of working on their own unique ways of doing things. So we've given out microgrants to people in Samoa, in the mountains in Peru, in Kenya, as well as here, mostly in the United States. And there's what's really interesting about this concept is that, that we are a whole lot of different kind of people. And so people, we have different ideas. Somebody wants to do a little project to show how to grow foods more effectively.
Yeah.
That's one of her big things, because she lives in the Dominican Republic. She did her Peace Corps work, and that's we're going to have it ties into the environment question. Or somebody else might want to work in the delivery of good food to the inner city.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty important. So we just, I think we got about 40 recipients now. And she has this workshop where they come together, selected ones come together, tell their story. It's very exciting. So I think in answer to your question, there are lots of ways of getting into this. But one of the ways we're going to focus on, thanks to my daughter, Leanne Campbell, by the way, one of the things is to come and look and see what this group of people are doing.
Mm-hmm.
From Peru to Kenya to California to Florida, whatever. And it's really quite exciting.
Wow. Incredible. So basically anything that you can do to help empower people to live a more plant-centered, fiber-fueled, whatever you want to call it, lifestyle is going to be impactful. So, and then also go and take, get your eCornell certification for plant-based nutrition. Do that and, be a pioneer in your own community. And then, okay, so Dr. Campbell, if you were just to tell your younger self something now, what would you tell yourself? What would you tell your younger self in terms of the challenges that you've faced, and what you now know versus what you knew then?
Actually, believe it or not, I'm writing another book now, a small book, just on that question, because I get asked that question quite a bit.
Wow.
And I did want to write the book, and my wife insisted on it too. I should do this. Is that when I got into this space initially, I really took a lot of heat. And I continued to take heat for the next 40 years. And I was at quite senior levels in my profession. I was actually the representative to Congress for the entire biomedical research community for a term. And so I was operating at a very visible, public visible level, so which made it worse in a way. And I had some people come out and doing some things in my profession or related to my profession, really uncanny, ridiculous things, like trying to throw me out of my society. Mm-hmm. Or, stuff like that. I mean, really stupid stuff, really coming from basically, quite frankly, a semi-organized effort on the part of industries, affected industries who don't like what I do. Mm-hmm. I'll just mention that really quickly. The United States government has one agency, Department of Agriculture, that takes our money to promote the consumption of the wrong food that makes us sick. But never mind, that's not too bad. So we had more people now are sick. We need more drugs. So the second agency of the government, Health and Human Services, they got the drugs to fix us. So one hand of the government is giving us the wrong food and keeping us sick. I'm not sure they plan it. They don't sit down and do this. I'm not talking about that kind of mischief necessarily, but this is what it turns out to be. One agency is essentially promoting the consumption of the wrong kind of food with our tax dollars. On the other hand, they're sitting there waiting. Oh, okay, we can solve all these problems with drugs. Mm-hmm. And so, it is a really serious systemic problem that we've become immersed in. And without trying to identify individuals with that kind of stuff or bad motivations, it is the system we live in. And when I think of it that way, then I try to think of what kind of philosophical basis do we have for doing what we do? Mm-hmm. And I think the answer to that is we tend to focus on details, the reductionist approach in medicine, because that makes money. You get ideas, you get intellectual property protection, that makes money. Mm-hmm. And conversely, if you use nutrition, that's a wholesome thing. Yeah. We can be well. We don't need those kind of products.
Right. Okay, so do you have any final thoughts before we part today?
Okay, I'll just basically answer your question.
Yeah.
What do I tell young people? I get asked that question quite a bit. The number one thing, for me, at least, as I look back, what came to my advantage, I came from a farm. I was the oldest oldest child, actually. My dad was a farmer. He only had 2 years of formal education. He had been an immigrant with his family from Ireland, Northern Ireland. And so I grew up on a farm and knew all of that. He wanted me to get an education. He went out of his way. And I had to drive like 100 miles a day to go to high school for 5 years. And so he really poured his life into our getting education research. And he always left us with a message for all of us. Tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You can't walk away from that idea. Wow. That's pretty darn good. So it kind of stuck with me, and that's why I like science so much, because science was a discipline that really emphasizes that. We got a structure to think about how to do things. We talk in a civil way, we debate issues. And so for the young person, I think education is really critically important as much as possible, whatever they choose to do. I'm not saying one profession is any better than another, but everybody can do their thing. But I think the main thing is getting an education focused on what they want to do. Mm-hmm. Really, and pick out something they enjoy and like. Work hard at it. Take it seriously, and work with the community and stuff like that. And most of all, be honest, and not be too corrupted by money, income producing potential.
Wow,
that's a kind of devastating. I mean, most people want to make money. That's fair enough. That's the way our system is, and I'm a free market kind of a guy, so I believe in that. But nonetheless, I think we're going to have to do some pretty deep thinking, mm-hmm. how to get to that sort of utopian state, where we can all do our thing and we work together and we can create health along the way.
Yes, I love it. Okay, Dr. Campbell, thank you so much. We are at the end of this episode. You are incredible, and we thank you for your work. We will, of course, put all of the links to find you and your programs in the show note and your books, etc. And just thank you so much for what you do.
Well, thank you very much. You're on the right track, I can tell. You're on the right track. So thank you again. Appreciate it.
I'm over here cheering you on because you just finished another episode of The Urban Pharmacy. For today's show notes, head on over to theurbanpharmacy.com and be sure to join us inside our private Facebook group called The Urban Pharmacy, where we share inspiration, live trainings, and holistic living tips to help you build community and the healthy lifestyle that you've always wanted. If you enjoyed today's episode, make sure you hit that subscribe button and please consider leaving us a 5-star review. Before we connect again on the next show, follow me on Instagram at The Urban Pharmacy. That's urban with an H and pharmacy with an F. And I can't wait to hear your wellness journey as we get to know each other better. You know, there's truly no better time than now to level up your life, and I am so proud of you for showing up today. Until next time, be well, Health Crusader.